Joining me now is Yamiche Alcindor at the White House, Sir Trevor Phillips, anchor at our sister network, Sky News in Britain. And with me right here on set is Elise Labott, Edward R. Murrow Press Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and author of Cosmopolitics on Substack. Thanks to all of you for starting us off on yet another big day at the White House. Yamiche, let me turn to you. A lot of headlines coming out of that news conference with President Trump and Prime Minister Starmer. What were your key takeaways?
My key takeaways were that these were two leaders who were really trying to look like they are getting along. Coming into this, we knew that there was a frosty relationship there because the UK Prime Minister had made it very clear that he did not agree with President Trump calling President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, a dictator. But when they were asked specifically about something that they could also disagree with, which is President Trump talking about making Canada the 51st state, they again pushed back on that and sort of wanted to be friendlier. So take a listen to that moment.
Our teams are now going to be working together on an economic deal. Our teams are going to be working together on security in Ukraine. You mentioned Canada. I think you're trying to find a divide between us that doesn't exist. We're the closest of nations, and we had very good discussions today, but we didn't discuss Canada.
Thank you.
So a really striking moment there. The other thing is that President Trump said more than once that if a Ukraine-Russia deal didn't happen soon, fairly soon, that he didn't think one could be possible. So very interesting that he's putting a timeline there, especially, of course, on the eve of President Zelensky coming to the White House, Kristen.
Yeah, Yamiche, that really stood out to me. The fact that he repeated, I think we heard it twice today, if he doesn't get a deal soon, it's not going to happen. It will be interesting to try to learn more about what specifically that means. Zooming out a little bit, though, the Prime Minister announced last week the UK's largest increase in security spending, and yet you still heard President Trump saying that there's not going to be a security element to this agreement. The concern for Europe, the concern for Ukraine, of course, is that that will leave Ukraine and, quite frankly, NATO nations vulnerable to a potential future attack by President Putin.
That's right. You can see the British Prime Minister really trying here to look like he was really giving a concession to President Trump, because even from his first term, President Trump has said over and over again that he didn't believe European countries were doing enough and giving enough money to their own defense spending, that the NATO allies and the members of NATO really needed to put that money up. And here's the UK saying, well, we're going to increase our defense spending. But President Trump just doubling down on this idea that he wants European countries to be doing more. It's also interesting because there's this element of whether or not America is going to give security guarantees to Ukraine if they are able to work out this rare earth minerals deal. I think that's something to very much watch as the president continues to say that he thinks they're close on having an agreement there. And it was also interesting as President Trump was asked specifically about this rare minerals deal. There was a reporter saying it could take decades to dig and to actually see the benefits of that deal. But President Trump is essentially looking for some sort of reimbursement in his mind to the millions and billions of aid that the U.S. has given Ukraine. So interesting that the president is doubling down on the idea that this is still going to be good for the United States, Kristen.
Absolutely. All right. Yamiche Alcindor at the White House. Thank you so much. Sir Phillips, let me turn to you. What was the Prime Minister hoping to get out of this bilateral meeting with President Trump, and do you think he did it?
Well, I think the first thing is he wanted to get out not being embarrassed. I think Prime Ministers go into the White House and they are never quite sure who they're going to meet, particularly with this president. Are you going to meet the president from the West Wing? Is it going to be Josiah Bartlett? Or are you going to meet what we imagine is a kind of grumpy president, let's call him Richard Nixon? Well, what was interesting today is that I think Keir Starmer got the best of all worlds. I think he met an avuncular, sunny, broad brush friend of Britain who loves royalty. Let's call him Ronald Reagan. So I think that the mood music coming out of the White House today, which is what the British Prime Minister most wanted, was that we are still the closest ally. We are still the favored partner, that there are things open to us, that we're not going to fall out over Ukraine, though it's worth saying that the British public have been absolutely steadfast in support of Ukraine. In the last 3 years, the polls on support of Ukraine, our willingness to put money, but now our willingness to put boots on the ground has not shifted at all. So I think from the British Prime Minister's point of view, this afternoon has been a success because it's been sunny, it's been cooperative, and he's come out looking like America's best friend.
And notable, towards the end there, President Trump even saying that they may possibly be able to reach a deal, a trade deal. So I thought that was notable. Let me ask you about the broader concern about America's commitment to its traditional allies and partners. I want to play some of what President Trump had to say in the Oval Office. Get your reaction on the other side.
If British troops are in Ukraine keeping the peace and get attacked by Russia, will you come to their aid?
If the British people are in Ukraine and they get attacked, you know, I've always found about the British, they don't need much help. They can take care of themselves very well, but they don't need help. You look at their career, you have done very well over the years, haven't you?
We have. I'm very proud of our country. And but we've also always been there backing each other up between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen.
What do you make of that part of the exchange today?
Well, this is the avuncular Trump with nice language, the smile, but underneath it, there is steel. And the steel says, we're not coming. We're not putting American boys and girls in harm's way. You guys have got to do that stuff on the ground for yourself, you Europeans. However, I think what he is also saying is that he wants to put commercial interests into Ukraine, which is what the critical minerals deal is all about. And he has said it more than once in the last 48 hours. Once we have our commercial interests in there, everybody has to understand they'd better not mess with them, because then you'll be messing with America. And in fact, the big thing, I think, which is we've got to see exactly how this plays out. But I think what the White House clearly has in mind is that what Europe needs is America's capacity to monitor, to surveil, to provide cyber defenses, to do very sophisticated things that Europe doesn't have, which don't necessarily involve having people on the ground. So I can see what the game plan is here. Whether Mr. Putin is going to play ball with that, we have yet to see.
All right, Sir Phillips, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us on this really big day. We really appreciate it. It's great to see you.
It's always great to talk to my sister.
Thank you, and my brother. Thank you. Come back soon, please. I appreciate it. Let me turn now to Elise Labott. Elise, thanks for being here. It's great to have you in person.
Yeah.
Let's start off with, I thought the tone today was so notable. You heard Sir Phillips really talk about it, where the British Prime Minister Starmer, was very careful to basically say there is no daylight between us, even though there are some real differences in terms of how they are handling this moment, but making it very clear he wants a seat at the negotiating table.
Well, that's exactly what it is, Kristen. There's like this catch-22 going on, right? The Americans don't want to bring the British or the Europeans into the table until they know what they're going to do. And the British, don't want to commit to do anything until they know the U.S. is going to be by their side. You remember Keith Kellogg, the envoy of President Trump on Ukraine, told the Europeans, no, you're not going to be involved. And that's because this whole idea that like bigger powers like the U.S. and Russia will decide, and little powers like Ukraine or the Europeans just have to eat it. However, they're coming with troops. They're coming with things to actually say, we deserve a seat at the table. So it was a combination of flattery, giving him what he wants, and also I think the British were trying to be this bridge between the Europeans and the United States, right? Like this special relationship. Ironically, this whole attitude by President Trump, this America first, is going to make the Europeans do what the U.S. has been wanting them to do for decades, which is to kind of get their security act together. And I think if President Trump sees them doing that, he's going to respect them more, he's going to want them at the table, and he's going to need them at the table.
Interesting. What did you make, Elise, of what each leader said about President Putin? You did hear President Trump say, yes, I trust, but verify. You heard more skepticism from the Prime Minister, and yet President Trump reiterating something that he recently started saying, which is we do want to get some of the land back for Ukraine?
He said a lot of things since his election, right? He
Yes.
said that he would put additional sanctions on Russia. Then he said he would lift those sanctions. He said that he would arm Ukraine. Then he said, oh, we're not going to arm Ukraine. I think he's not sure. I think he's still trying to feel out President Putin. But at the end of the day, even as lovely as he thinks Putin is, and remember, even President Bush said he looked into Putin and saw his soul, I think President Trump doesn't want to be seen in the end as being taken advantage of or by losing to President Putin. So he wants to come out of this with a deal for Ukraine that's not like Afghanistan, right? He doesn't want some fiasco. He wants something that he can claim to and say. But he also said today, it was a little something because there was talk about NATO, and he said, oh, not NATO. But he also said they're not going to keep all of their land. And let's be honest, Kristen, when you talk about Crimea and the invasion,
Yes.
even before President Trump came on, nobody was talking about giving back Crimea. So I think it's going to be something along the lines of a frozen conflict where nothing's going to be given back to Ukraine. But I think, President Putin is still going to keep some territory.
What, Elise, are you going to be watching for tomorrow, particularly against the backdrop of President Trump having called President Zelensky a dictator earlier this week, falsely accused him of starting the war? He didn't. Russia invaded Ukraine. You heard him moderate in real time there. He said, did I call him a dictator? I don't remember that.
Right. That backfired.
Yeah.
Not only people in the United States, his Republican colleagues kind of were trying to find some way to turn that back. I think it's going to be a warm meeting. I think even though he, has this issue with Zelensky and Ukraine, I think he actually respects President Zelensky. You saw him say they fought very bravely, the Ukrainians. And he wants a deal. I think now that President Zelensky has said, I'm willing to sign some commercial deal, I think they're going to give President Trump what he wants. I think it's going to be a pretty good meeting.
All right, Elise Labott, we always appreciate your
It's great to be
insights.
here.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much. Come back again soon.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.